My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 24 years old, and my story begins with a moment I'll never forget. We were gathered at the kitchen table, the same place where birthdays were celebrated and secrets were whispered. But that night felt different. My mom's voice trembled as she told me I needed to step up again for my brother. And then, with one cold sentence, my father made it clear they wanted me to sell my entire watch collection to pay for his mistakes. White right pointing backhand index. Before I share what happened next, tell me where you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. The sound of the clock ticking on the wall was louder than usual that night, almost like it was mocking me. I sat at the old wooden table, the same one where I used to do my homework in middle school, where we ate countless dinners as a family. The smell of my mother's pot roast lingered in the air, but it didn't feel warm or comforting. Instead, the air felt heavy, like the walls were closing in on me. My dad's hands were folded neatly on the table, his jaw tight, and my mom kept wringing her napkin until it was nothing but a crumpled mess. I knew something was coming. I could feel it in the way they avoided looking at me directly. My brother, Ryan, leaned back in his chair, smirking like he already knew the outcome. That smug look on his face made my stomach twist. I had seen it before. Every time he got into trouble, every time our parents rushed to protect him. Dad finally cleared his throat, his voice low but sharp. "Sarah, we need to talk about something important." I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay calm. "Okay, what's going on?" He glanced at Mom, and she nodded slightly, as if giving him permission. Then he looked straight at me. "It's about your watch collection." My chest tightened. "What about it?" Mom leaned forward, her eyes filled with that mix of sadness and guilt I'd come to recognize over the years. "Honey, your brother is in a tough spot again. He owes some people a lot of money, and if he doesn't pay them back soon—" Her voice trailed off, and she shook her head. Ryan interrupted, his tone casual, almost mocking. "It's not that big of a deal, Sarah. You've got those watches just sitting there, collecting dust. They could actually help someone for once." I clenched my fists under the table. "Those watches aren't just sitting there. They mean something to me. They are mine." Dad leaned in, his voice firmer now. "We're not asking, Sarah. You need to sell them. This family has always looked out for each other, and it's your turn to do the right thing." His words hit me like a slap. My turn? As if I hadn't spent my whole life cleaning up Ryan's messes. As if I hadn't already given enough. Memories flashed in my mind. The times I covered for Ryan when he skipped school. The summer I worked 2 jobs to pay off the ticket he got for crashing Mom's car. The countless lies I told on his behalf just to keep peace in the house. And now they wanted more. I shook my head slowly, my voice trembling but steady enough to be heard. "You can't be serious. Those watches are all I have left of Grandpa. He gave me my first one when I turned 16. I worked for the rest of them. Every piece has a story." Ryan scoffed, rolling his eyes. "Stories don't pay debts." The room went quiet for a moment, and all I could hear was the ticking clock. I looked at my parents, searching for even a flicker of understanding, but all I saw was expectation, pressure, and a quiet kind of demand that felt like betrayal. Mom reached out, placing her hand on mine. "Sarah, sometimes we have to sacrifice for the people we love. Ryan made a mistake, but he's still your brother." I pulled my hand back. "And I'm still your daughter. When do I matter?" The words slipped out before I could stop them, and for a second, the room froze. My father's face hardened, his eyes narrowing as though I had just crossed some invisible line. "Don't start with that attitude. You've always had a roof over your head, food on the table. We've supported you too. Don't act like you've been abandoned." Anger surged through me, hot and blinding. "Supported me? Dad, every decision in this family revolves around Ryan. Every time he screws up, I'm the one who pays the price. And now you want me to sell the one thing I actually earned for myself." Ryan leaned forward now, his smirk gone, his voice laced with irritation. "Stop being so dramatic, Sarah. You're not losing anything. Watches are replaceable. Family isn't. That line, family isn't, hit me like a cruel joke. Because in that moment, it was clear, to them, family meant saving Ryan at any cost, even if it meant breaking me in the process. I pushed back my chair, the legs scraping loudly against the floor. My heart pounded as I stood, looking down at all of them. If you think I'm going to sell those watches for him, you're wrong. I won't do it. Mum's eyes filled with tears, and Dad's face turned red with anger. Ryan just sat there, leaning back again, smugness returning as if he knew they'd eventually break me down. But something inside me shifted that night. For the first time, I wasn't just the quiet daughter who gave in, who made sacrifices without a fight. I could feel the weight of every moment I'd been silenced pressing against me, pushing me to finally draw a line. Dad's voice boomed across the table. Don't you walk away from this conversation. You owe this family, Sarah. Don't forget who raised you. I turned back, meeting his glare with steady eyes. And don't forget who I am. I'm not Ryan's safety net. Not anymore. The silence that followed was suffocating, but beneath it, I felt something I hadn't in years. Strength. The kitchen table, once the place where I felt small and voiceless, had become the place where I finally spoke the truth. And even though their faces told me this battle was far from over, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to back down this time. The house went silent after my father's words. My mother looked down, pretending the wood grain on the table was the most interesting thing she'd ever seen. My brother leaned back, arms crossed, wearing that smug grin he always wore when he thought he'd won. I didn't fight back. I didn't shout. Instead, I excused myself, walked down the hallway, and slipped into the room that had become my only sanctuary, the small, cluttered workshop where I kept my watches. The smell of leather straps, machine oil, and polished steel greeted me like an old friend. I shut the door behind me, leaning my back against it as if I needed to barricade myself from the people I shared blood with. My hands shook, not from fear but from a mixture of rage and heartbreak. I stared at the cabinets, drawers, and velvet boxes stacked neatly across the shelves. To anyone else, it would have looked like a collection of expensive timepieces. To me, each watch was a memory, a story, a reminder that life had meaning outside of the mess my family always dragged me into. I pulled out the first watch I'd ever owned, the one I bought at a pawn shop when I was 15. It wasn't worth much, scratches covered the glass, and the strap was frayed, but it was mine. I'd saved up weeks of pay from sweeping the floors at the local diner just to buy it. I still remembered the look the owner gave me when I handed over a crumpled wad of bills and coins. You sure about this, kid? He'd asked. I was sure. That watch made me feel like I had control over something, even if it was just the ticking seconds on my wrist. Setting it on the table, I reached for another box, this one housing a sleek silver piece that once belonged to my grandfather. He wasn't a wealthy man, but he treated that watch like it was treasure. I could almost see him again, sitting on the porch of his old farmhouse, polishing it every Sunday morning. Time doesn't wait for anyone, he used to say, tapping the glass before slipping it onto his wrist. But it leaves marks, good or bad. Don't forget that. I swallowed hard at the memory. He'd been gone 10 years, but his words rang in my ears like he'd spoken them yesterday. Another box revealed a navy blue diver's watch, my graduation gift from a teacher who had believed in me more than my own parents ever did. Mr. Lawson had pulled me aside after the ceremony, pressing the velvet box into my hands with a soft smile. You've got potential. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. At that moment, I'd felt seen. Not as the quiet girl in the back row, not as the daughter who never measured up, but as someone who mattered. That watch wasn't just about telling time. It was proof that someone believed in my future. I kept opening box after box, each one unlocking a different memory. The black leather chronograph I'd bought after my first real job at the tech store. The gold-trimmed piece I'd found at an estate sale, hidden in a drawer no one else had cared to open. the green-faced watch my best friend gave me before she moved across the country, saying, "So you'll never forget the hours we wasted laughing." Every watch was a chapter of my life, stitched together by moments no one could take away from me. As I laid them out across the white bench, a strange calm washed over me. These weren't just objects worth a fortune, though yes, some of them could pay off more than my brother's debt. They were the only things I had built without my family's interference. No lies, no manipulation, no guilt. Just me and the passage of time. I sat down, running my fingers gently over the rows of ticking faces. Each second that passed felt heavier than the last. My brother saw numbers, dollar signs, and a way out of his own mess. My parents saw a convenient solution to keep their golden child afloat. But I saw lifelines. I saw pieces of myself I had fought for, preserved, and protected. The thought of handing even one of them over felt like ripping out pages from the only book I'd ever written. And yet, the pressure at that kitchen table had been suffocating. They didn't care that these watches meant something. They didn't care that I had worked for years, quietly building this collection piece by piece. All they cared about was saving him. Again, I thought back to the nights I'd heard my parents bailing him out of trouble. The phone calls at 2 in the morning. The hushed conversations about money, favors, and keeping this between us. Each time, they turned to me not with pride, but with expectation that I would pick up the slack, that I would sacrifice. And now they wanted the only thing I truly loved. I felt my chest tighten. My breaths came faster. But instead of letting the anger consume me, I focused on the steady ticking that filled the room. It was like a chorus of small voices, reminding me I wasn't powerless. Not anymore. My phone buzzed on the desk, a message from my brother lighting up the screen. "You better bring those watches tomorrow. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." I stayed at the words until they blurred. Harder. He had no idea what hard was. Hard was saving every penny to buy a second-hand watch while everyone else laughed. Hard was growing up invisible while he soaked up all the attention. Hard was carving out an identity in a family that never once asked what I wanted. The anger returned, but this time it felt sharper, more controlled. I looked down at the rows of watches spread before me, and a thought began to form. Dark, dangerous, but liberating. If they wanted to take them from me, they'd have to find them first. I pulled open the drawer of my workbench and reached for the folded blueprints I had kept hidden there for years. Plans for a vault I had been building piece by piece beneath the garage floor. At first, it had been a project, something to test my skills. Now, it felt like fate. One by one, I began placing the watches back into their boxes, but not with the same tender care as before. This time, it felt like preparation. Like soldiers being sent into hiding before a battle. My heart pounded, but I knew with absolute certainty they would not take these from me. Not my father, not my mother, and definitely not my brother. When the last box was sealed, I stood in the center of the room, breathing in the silence. The watches had always been my memories, but now they were something more. They were my defense. And for the first time in a long while, I felt ready. The workshop was still, but inside me, something restless stirred. My decision felt final. My watches would not be theirs to take. Yet even as that resolve hardened, a sliver of unease cut through the certainty. Betrayal doesn't always come from the obvious enemy. Sometimes it hides in the shadows you thought was safe. That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the ticking of the old wall clock in the hallway echoing like a drumbeat inside my skull. Each strike of the second hand reminded me of the weight of tomorrow. My brother's message replayed in my mind, the arrogance laced between every word. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Harder, as if he hadn't already made life unbearable. By morning, my plan was clear. I moved quietly, carrying the boxes of watches one by one to the garage. The trapdoor beneath the tool bench creaked faintly as I pried it open, revealing the unfinished vault I had been building for months. It wasn't complete, but it was enough to hide what mattered most. I lowered each watch inside carefully, my palms sweating despite the cool air. When the last one was secured, I covered the opening with a heavy wooden bench and swept the floor clean of dust, erasing every trace of movement. Just as I finished, I heard footsteps. Light, hesitant, but unmistakable. My mother's voice followed, soft but strained. "Are you in there?" I froze, dust clinging to my hands. She stepped into the garage, her arms folded tightly as if she was shielding herself from her own conscience. "What are you doing?" she asked, her eyes darting around the room. "Nothing," I said flatly, wiping my hands on my jeans. Her gaze lingered on the white bench longer than it should have. She wasn't stupid. She knew this was where I spent most of my time, where my hobby lived. But instead of pressing, she sighed and rubbed her temples. "Your brother, he's not handling this well," she murmured. "He's scared. We all are. If you just don't." My voice cracked, but I steadied it. "Don't come in here and ask me to throw away the only thing I've built for myself." Her lips tightened, and for the first time, I saw something other than pity or disappointment in her eyes. It was calculation. Quiet, dangerous calculation. That unsettled me more than anything else. The day dragged on, each moment heavy with tension. I stayed in the garage, tinkering with old straps, polishing bezels that didn't need polishing, doing anything to keep my hands busy. Every so often, I heard whispers inside the house, my father's low voice, my brother's sharper tone, my mother's measured replies. I couldn't make out the words, but the rhythm of it told me all I needed to know. They were planning something, and it didn't include me. When the sun dipped below the horizon, the knock came. Hard, urgent. My brother pushed the door open before I could even respond, his face flushed with frustration. "Where are they?" he demanded. "Where's what?" I asked, feigning ignorance. "Don't play dumb with me," he snapped, stepping closer. "The watches. Dad said you'd bring them out today." I laughed bitterly. "Dad can say whatever he wants. They are mine." His jaw tightened, his fists clenching at his sides. For a moment, I thought he might actually lunge at me, but instead he smirked, a dangerous smirk I hadn't seen since we were kids, the kind that meant he'd already outplayed me. "Fine," he said. "If you want to be stubborn, but you're not as clever as you think." He turned and left, the door slamming behind him. I stood frozen, the echo of his words rattling inside my head. Not as clever as I think. It wasn't just a threat, it was a warning. The betrayal came hours later. I was in the kitchen making tea, trying to calm my nerves, when I heard the faint scrape of metal against wood in the garage. My heart dropped. I moved quickly, careful not to make a sound, and peeked through the narrow hallway window. My father and brother were in the garage, flashlights in hand. And my mother, was pointing to the white bench, her voice low but firm. My stomach twisted. She'd told them. I wanted to burst in, to scream at her, to demand why she would give me up like that. But something kept me still, rooted in the shadows. I watched as my brother shoved the bench aside with a grunt, his flashlight beam sweeping across the floor. My father crouched, his hands feeling along the edges until he found the latch. The trapdoor groaned as it lifted, the sound tearing through me like a blade. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Betrayal has a sound, I realized, and for me, it was the hollow creak of wood revealing everything I had fought to protect. They pulled out the boxes, one after another, stacking them on the floor like loot after a successful raid. My brother's grin widened with each one. My father said nothing, just nodded grimly, as though this theft was justified. And my mother, she stood back, arms crossed, eyes cold, as if she'd finally chosen which child she valued. Something inside me broke. I stumbled back from the window, my hands trembling so violently I nearly dropped the teacup. The house suddenly felt smaller, suffocating, like its walls were closing in on me. Every sound, the clink of boxes, the muffled voices, the scrape of shoes on the garage floor, was a hammer pounding into my chest. I wanted to storm in, to fight, to claw those watchers back from their greedy hands. But another voice, quieter and sharper, whispered inside me, "Wait." So I waited. I let them carry the boxes out, let them believe they'd won. But as I stood there in the dim hallway, tears burning my eyes, I made myself a promise. They thought they had taken everything from me. They were wrong. I didn't sleep that night. The house was too loud, even in its silence. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind through the shutters, sounded like a warning. My chest tightened with each shallow breath. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my body still but my mind spinning like gears inside one of my dismantled watches. They thought it was over. They thought by dragging those boxes out of the garage, they had ended the fight. But they didn't understand. Those watches weren't just possessions. They were keys. Not literal ones, but the kind that unlocked doors to my past, my identity, my sense of worth. And keys, once stolen, always leave behind the threat of what they might open for someone else. When morning came, the smell of coffee wafted from the kitchen. I dragged myself out of bed and followed it, though the thought of facing them made my stomach knot. My brother was already at the table, his hair uncombed, his shirt wrinkled. He grinned when he saw me. "Sleep well?" he asked, his tone slick with mockery. I didn't answer. My mother moved between us, pouring coffee into mugs like nothing had happened, like she hadn't pointed them straight to my hiding place. The betrayal still pulsed in my veins, but I swallowed it down. My father folded the newspaper, his eyes meeting mine. "We have the keys now," he said calmly. The words chilled me. "What keys?" He didn't flinch. "The keys to the storage unit. The one you thought we didn't know about." For a second, I couldn't breathe. My throat tightened, my fingers curled into fists at my sides. The storage unit. The one downtown where I kept the prototypes too fragile to risk at home. The sketches, the journals, the blueprints for designs I hadn't even built yet. "How?" The word caught in my throat. My brother chuckled, tapping his pocket. "You're not the only one who knows how to pick a lock. You really should have hidden the spare better." He dangled the small brass key between his fingers, the light catching its grooves, mocking me. My chest burned. "That's mine," I said, the words low, dangerous. "Correction," he shot back, leaning across the table. "It was yours. Now it's family property." The threat hung in the air, heavy and unshakable. I slammed my hand down on the table so hard the mugs rattled. "You don't get to call it that. You don't get to decide what belongs to me." My mother flinched at my tone, but she didn't defend me. My father simply folded his arms. "You'll watch your words in this house," he said, each syllable slow and deliberate. "Unless you'd rather we decide you don't belong here at all." The threat wasn't subtle, and it struck deeper than I wanted to admit. I left the kitchen before I could say something I couldn't take back. My hands shook as I paced the hallway, rage simmering beneath my skin. Every instinct screamed at me to fight, to rip that key from my brother's smug hand, but another voice, quieter, sharper, told me to wait. Wait, but not idle. By noon, the house felt suffocating. I grabbed my jacket and stormed out, my feet carrying me without direction. The air was crisp, biting against my skin, but it cleared my head just enough to think. I ended up at the corner diner, a place I hadn't stepped into since high school. The waitress, older now, gave me a cautious smile as I slid into a booth. I ordered nothing but coffee and sat there, staring at the chipped surface of the table, replaying every word from that morning. The keys, the storage unit, the threat. I couldn't let them take what was inside. As I sat there, my phone buzzed. A message. My brother again. TikTok. Might swing by your little storage spot tonight. Better hope nothing gets broken. I stayed at the screen, my jaw tightening. He was daring me to stop him, taunting me with the ticking clock of my own creation. For the first time, I felt fear sharpen into clarity. If I kept reacting, they'd always be ahead. I needed to anticipate, to strike before they did. I paid for the coffee, left a few bills on the counter, and walked out into the fading light. My feet carried me downtown, toward the storage unit. When I reached it, my heart hammered. The place smelled of concrete and dust, rows of locked doors stretching into the shadows. Mine was tucked in the back, number 217, a small metal door that held years of sketches, prototypes, even the cracked wristwatch I'd fixed as a kid, the one that had started everything. I slipped my own key into the lock and turned it. The door creaked open, and I exhaled, stepping inside. The air smelled faintly of oil and leather. Boxes were stacked neatly along the wall, journals lined the shelves, and the table in the center still held my latest design, a watch with a mechanism so delicate it seemed almost alive. But I wasn't here to admire. I was here to protect. I moved quickly, gathering the most irreplaceable items, sketches, journals, prototypes, and stuffing them into a duffel bag. My hands shook, not from hesitation but from urgency. Every second felt borrowed. A sound froze me. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate, echoing through the corridor. My pulse spiked. I shoved the bag under the table and pressed myself against the wall. The footsteps grew closer. A voice followed, low, mocking. "Thought you'd get ahead of us. How?" My brother's silhouette filled the doorway, the brass key still glinting in his hand. Behind him, my father's shadow loomed. I straightened, forcing the tremor out of my voice. "You don't belong here." He laughed, stepping inside. "Neither do you, apparently." His eyes flicked to the shelves, to the bag half hidden under the table. "Looks like someone was trying to run." My father's voice was steady, unyielding. "Give us the bag, now." I clenched my fists, every muscle in my body screaming to resist. Over my dead body. My brother smirked, taking a slow step closer. "Careful," he said, his voice dripping with false sweetness. "Threats can go both ways." The air crackled with tension, the narrow room suddenly too small to hold us all. I felt the weight of the duffel bag at my feet, the weight of everything it carried, years of my life condensed into fragile paper and steel. And in that moment, I realized something that steadied me. They had the keys, but I still had the will. And will, I knew, could be sharper than any threat. The silence between us was thick, the kind that pressed on your skin like humidity. My brother's grin was sharp, his hand flexing around the brass key like it gave him power, and maybe it did. But I wasn't staring at the key anymore. I was staring at myself, at who I had been up until this moment, and who I refused to be any longer. I stepped forward, planting my body between them and the duffel bag. My chest rose and fell with controlled breaths, and though my knees trembled, I forced steel into my voice. "I'm done letting you take from me." The words hung there, strange and foreign in my mouth, but steady. My father's brow furrowed, a crack in his mask of calm. My brother tilted his head, amused, but I caught the flicker in his eyes, the brief uncertainty he hadn't meant to reveal. "You're speaking like you have a choice," my father said evenly. "I do," I shot back. My hand brushed the strap of the duffel bag at my feet, and I'm making it right now. For once, I didn't wait for his approval. I crouched, grabbed the bag, and slung it over my shoulder. The weight of it pressed into me, but instead of dragging me down, it steadied me. "Move," I said. My brother barked out a laugh. "Or what? You'll hit me with your sketchbooks." He stepped closer, blocking the doorway with his broad frame. The air smelled faintly of the cologne he always wore, sharp and suffocating. I didn't back away. "Step aside." For the first time in my life, I looked him directly in the eye without blinking, without folding. He searched my face for hesitation, for the weakness he was so used to finding there. But he didn't find it this time. Behind him, my father's voice cut through. "Let them go." My brother snapped his head back. "What? We're just letting them walk out with it." "Let them," my father repeated, his tone clipped. My brother's nostrils flared, but he stepped back reluctantly, his smirk replaced with a tight scowl. I didn't wait. I walked past them, the duffel strap biting into my shoulder, my pulse hammering in my ears. Each step down the corridor felt like breaking a chain, link by link. By the time I reached the exit and pushed open the heavy metal door, the cold night air hit my face like freedom. I didn't stop walking until I reached the main street. My legs ached, my hands shook, but a strange calm wrapped around me. For the first time, I hadn't caved. I hadn't bent myself into the shape they demanded. I had chosen me. Still, the adrenaline crashed hard. My chest heaved, and I stumbled into a bus stop bench, dropping the bag at my feet. A woman nearby gave me a curious glance, clutching her grocery bags tighter. I offered a weak smile, though my hands were still trembling. I sat there, the city humming around me, the buzz of neon signs, the rumble of traffic, the distant chatter of people heading home. Life moved on, indifferent to my personal revolution. And maybe that was the most grounding thing of all. I pulled one of the journals from the bag, flipping it open to a page where my younger handwriting sprawled messy across the paper. Diagrams, notes, ideas that had once been too fragile to share with anyone. My throat tightened, but not from fear this time. It was something closer to gratitude, for the version of me that had kept going even when no one believed. The bus screeched to a stop, and I climbed aboard, clutching the bag like it was a lifeline. The driver barely looked at me, just grunted as I swiped my card and found a seat in the back. As the city blurred past the windows, I realized I didn't know exactly where I was headed. But for once, the uncertainty didn't paralyze me. It felt like possibility. Halfway through the ride, my phone buzzed again. Another message. I braced myself for my brother's threats, but when I unlocked the screen, it wasn't him. It was a number I hadn't seen in months. An old friend. Heard you're back in town. Coffee sometime. I stayed at the words, my heart stuttering. In another life, I would have ignored it, too wrapped up in the chaos of my family to make space for anyone else. But tonight was different. Tonight, I wasn't shrinking myself for anyone. I typed back 2 words, name the place. When I slipped the phone back into my pocket, a small smile tugged at my lips. It wasn't just about defying my family anymore. It was about building something of my own, one choice at a time. The bus rattled to my stop, and I stepped out into the chilled night. The air smelled faintly of rain, though the pavement was dry. I walked the last few blocks to a cheap motel I'd passed 100 times before but never entered. The neon vacancy sign buzzed faintly, half the letters burned out. Inside, the clerk barely looked up as I handed over cash for a room. The key was plastic, not brass, and it felt strangely symbolic as it slid into my palm. Not a family key. Not a stolen one. Mine. The room itself was dim, the carpet worn, the air stale with detergent. But when I dropped the duffel onto the bed and sank beside it, I felt more at home than I had in years. I unzipped the bag, pulling out the watch prototype I'd been working on. The gears glimmered faintly under the yellowed lamplight, delicate and stubborn. I turned it in my hand, the mechanism clicking softly, steady and patient. For the first time, I wasn't imagining my family's approval as I worked. I wasn't waiting for them to acknowledge me. This was mine. I sat there for hours, sketching new adjustments, winding the gears, scribbling notes in the margins of my journal. Time slipped away, but it didn't feel wasted. It felt earned. And when the sun finally broke through the thin motel curtains, painting the room in pale light, I realized something simple but profound. Choosing myself hadn't ended the threats. It hadn't solved everything, but it had given me the one thing I'd never had before, permission. Permission to live, to build, to fight, not for their acceptance, but for me. And that, I thought as I closed the journal, was the beginning of everything.